They didn't call, they didn't text, and by the time the sun set on Mother's Day, I realized they weren't coming at all. I stood at the kitchen sink long after the dishes were clean, my hands resting in lukewarm water, staring out at the backyard like something might change if I waited long enough. The tulips my neighbor had dropped off that morning sat untouched on the counter, their pink petals already starting to curl. I remember thinking how quiet the house felt. Too quiet for a day that used to be loud with laughter, clinking plates, and my son's voice calling out, "Mom, where'd you put the good napkins?" That silence was the first crack. I just didn't know it yet. Before all this, my life was simple. Not perfect, but steady in a way you grow to appreciate as you get older. I'm 63 years old, widowed for nearly a decade. I live in the same three-bedroom house my late husband and I bought when our son Daniel was still in diapers. The paint has faded on the porch railing and the hallway floorboard outside the bathroom still creaks, but it's home. It smells like lemon cleaner and old books, and on quiet afternoons you can hear the clock in the living room tick like it's keeping me company. Daniel is my only child. I raised him to be polite, responsible, maybe too polite sometimes. He married Melissa 8 years ago. She was charming in the beginning, always smiling, always complimenting my cooking. She used to call me Mama Ruth, even though I told her she didn't have to. Back then, I thought it was sweet. They live about 40 minutes away, in a newer neighborhood with matching mailboxes and trimmed hedges. They have two kids, my grandkids, Lily and Noah, who used to run through my house like it was their second home. Mother's Day, birthdays, random Sundays, those days meant something to us. Or at least I thought they did. In the weeks leading up to Mother's Day, I did what I always do. I planned. Nothing fancy, just a roast chicken, mashed potatoes, that lemon cake Daniel likes. I even bought a little wooden picture frame and printed a photo of me with the kids from last summer. I set it on the dining table the night before, right where Daniel would sit, so he'd notice it. Melissa texted me that Saturday. "Tomorrow's crazy for us, but we'll try to stop by later, heart." I read that message 3 times. Try didn't sit well with me, but I told myself not to overthink it. People are busy, kids have schedules. I'd learned not to be the kind of mother who complains. Sunday came. I woke up early, the way I always do when I'm expecting company. I showered, put on a soft blue sweater, and even dabbed on a little perfume, lavender, the one Daniel once said reminded him of home. I checked my phone more than I'd like to admit. By noon, nothing. By 3, still nothing. At 5, I reheated the chicken and turned the oven off. When the sun started to dip, I sat at the table alone, the extra place settings still neatly laid out. I told myself they might call. They didn't. That night, I cried, but quietly. I've learned how to do that without making a sound. The next few weeks passed in a strange fog. Daniel texted occasionally, short messages. Busy week, kids are a handful. Melissa didn't reach out at all. I told myself it was nothing, that I was being sensitive. That's what mothers do. We make excuses for our children until there's nothing left but truth. The first real sign something was wrong came in the form of a phone call. It was a Thursday evening. I was folding laundry when my phone rang. Daniel's name lit up the screen. I felt a flicker of relief. "Hey, Mom," he said, sounding tired. "Hi, sweetheart. Everything okay?" Yeah, just... Listen, I wanted to ask you something." There was a pause. I could hear voices in the background, Melissa's low and sharp, like she was coaching him. "We're in a bit of a tight spot. The car needs repairs, and Noah's school fees came up earlier than expected. We were wondering if you could help us out, just for a little while." My stomach tightened, not because of the money, but because of how easily the words came after weeks of distance. "How much?" I asked. He hesitated. 5,000. I sat down on the edge of the bed. 5,000 wasn't pocket change, but I had savings. I'd been careful my whole life. "I'll think about it," I said. "Can you come by this weekend? We should talk." Another pause. "Sure," he said. "We can do that." When I hung up, my hands were trembling, not with anger yet, but with something colder, confusion, hurt, a question that had begun to form quietly in the back of my mind. Why was it so easy to forget me until they needed something? That night, I pulled out my checkbook and my old folder of bank statements. I didn't know why, just a feeling, like when the air shifts before a storm. As I sat there under the yellow glow of the lamp, flipping through pages, I realized something else, too. This wasn't the first time they'd asked. It was just the first time I'd really paid attention. I closed the folder and stared at the wall, listening to the clock tick louder than ever. And for the first time since Mother's Day, I stopped making excuses. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, memories floated up, little moments I'd brushed aside before. The missed calls, the canceled visits, the way Melissa's voice had grown sharper over the years, while Daniel's had grown quieter, like he was always bracing himself for something. I lay there listening to the refrigerator hum and the clock ticking in the living room, wondering when exactly things had shifted. By morning, I felt tired in a deeper way, not just my body, my heart. Saturday came faster than I expected. I cleaned the house, even though it didn't really need it, wiped already clean counters, straightened picture frames. When you're nervous, your hands look for work. I brewed a pot of coffee and set out the good mugs, the ones with the little blue flowers around the rim. Daniel bought them for me years ago on a trip he took with his father. I hadn't used them in a while. They arrived late. I heard the car before I saw it, the familiar rattle in the engine that Daniel kept promising to fix. I watched through the front window as Melissa climbed out first, already tapping on her phone. Daniel followed, shoulders slightly hunched, the kids trailing behind him. Lily waved when she saw me. Noah didn't look up at all. "Grandma!" Lily shouted as she ran in. She smelled like sunscreen and bubble gum. I hugged her tight, breathing her in like I needed proof she was still mine. Melissa stepped inside, gave a quick smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Hi, Ruth." No Mama Ruth anymore. I noticed that, too. We sat in the living room. The kids turned on the TV. Daniel wrapped his hands around his coffee mug like he was warming himself. Melissa crossed her legs and leaned back, arms folded. I didn't rush into the money. I asked about school, about work, about how they were holding up. Daniel answered when he could. Melissa answered when she felt like it. Finally, I said it. "You know, I was surprised I didn't hear from you on Mother's Day." The room went still. Even the TV seemed quieter. Melissa shrugged. "It just slipped by. Things get busy." Daniel looked at his hands. "Yeah, Mom, sorry about that." I waited. No apology from her, no explanation, just that shrug like it was nothing. "And now you're here asking for money," I said gently. "Can you help me understand?" Melissa leaned forward. "Ruth, this isn't personal. Families help each other. You're in a better position than we are." The words landed wrong. Not would you, not thank you, just expectation. "I am," I said slowly, "because I worked for it, and because your father and I planned carefully." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Mom, we're not trying to take advantage." "I know, though a part of me wasn't so sure anymore. But before I agree to anything, I need to be honest. I've felt pushed aside lately." Melissa rolled her eyes. She didn't even try to hide it. "That's not fair." "What's not fair," I said, my voice steady but firm, "is feeling invisible until you need something." Daniel finally looked up at me. His eyes were tired, guilty. "We didn't mean to make you feel that way." I nodded. "I'm sure you didn't, but meaning and impact aren't the same thing." They left with a promise to talk more soon. No check, no decision, just a strange heaviness in the air after the door closed. That afternoon, I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. I don't know what I was looking for at first. Maybe reassurance, maybe proof I was wrong. Instead, I found something else. I logged into my bank account and started scrolling back through the past few years. Small transfers at first, then larger ones. Money I'd given without hesitation for braces, for a temporary job loss, for a vacation the kids really needed. It added up to more than I realized. And then I noticed something else, a withdrawal I didn't recognize. It wasn't huge, just under $2,000, but it stood out. I clicked on it. The date made my chest tighten. It was from 3 weeks earlier. I hadn't been to the bank that day, I was sure of it. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I picked up the phone and called my bank. The woman on the other end was polite, calm. That withdrawal was made in person, with proper identification. My mouth drew dry. Whose identification? I'm sorry, ma'am, I can't disclose that without further verification. When I hung up, my hands were shaking again, but this time not with confusion, with certainty. Daniel had been an authorized user on my account years ago, back when his father was sick and we were juggling hospital bills. I'd never removed his access. I trusted him. I never thought I'd need to question it. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the photo frame I'd bought for Mother's Day, the one still sitting unopened. The smiles in that picture felt like they belonged to another life. I didn't confront them right away. Part of me wanted to. Another part needed to understand how deep this went. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I started paying attention. I watched how Daniel avoided my eyes when money came up, how Melissa spoke about what's yours eventually, like it was already decided, how quickly they brushed off my feelings but never hesitated to bring up their needs. The final clue came from Lily. She was coloring at my table one afternoon when she looked up and said, "Mommy says we're getting Grandma's house someday." I smiled at her, my heart pounding. "Oh?" She nodded seriously. "Yeah, Mommy says Grandma won't need it forever." I kept smiling until she went back to her crayons. That night, I sat alone in my living room, the house quiet again. But this time, the silence wasn't empty. It was loud with realization. They hadn't just skipped Mother's Day. They had already moved on, without me. And I knew then, whatever happened next would change everything. After Lily's words settled into me, I couldn't unhear them. They echoed when I washed dishes, when I folded laundry, when I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan as it spun slow circles above me. Grandma won't need it forever. It wasn't just a careless comment from a child. It was a window into conversations I was never meant to hear. I told myself to slow down, not to jump to conclusions. I've lived long enough to know how dangerous assumptions can be. But I also knew this feeling, the quiet tightening in the chest, the instinct that something is being rearranged behind your back. So I did what any woman does when she's torn between denial and truth. I observed. I noticed how Melissa's tone changed whenever my house came up. "That place is so big for just one person," she said once, smiling like she was being practical. I noticed how Daniel had started asking questions he'd never asked before, about my savings, about whether I'd updated my will, about what I'd want if something happened. He said it gently, but there was a script to it now, rehearsed, like someone had coached him. One afternoon, he came by alone. That alone should have told me something. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, his hands folded the way they used to be when he was nervous as a boy. "Mom," he said, not looking at me, "Melissa thinks we should talk about the future." I poured him iced tea and slid the glass toward him. The ice clinked softly. "The future is a broad word." He smiled weakly. "You know what I mean." I waited. He continued, "She's worried that if something happens to you suddenly, things could get complicated." "Complicated for who?" I asked. He sighed. "For everyone." That was when I felt it shift, the moment when the last thread of pretending snapped. I'm healthy, I take care of myself, and I've made my arrangements. Daniel finally looked at me. His eyes were pleading. We're not trying to rush anything. It's just the kids' future matters too. I nodded slowly. And mine doesn't? He said, that's not what I meant. But it was what he'd said. After he left, I sat at that same table for a long time. I traced the ring left behind by his glass with my finger, watching the water soak into the wood. My husband used to sit there every morning, reading the paper, humming under his breath. This house wasn't just walls and equity, it was memory, sacrifice, years of choosing family over myself. And suddenly it felt like a prize they were circling. That night, I made a decision, not out of anger, out of clarity. I called my lawyer the next morning. Her name is Elaine. We're around the same age, and she has a way of listening that makes you feel both seen and steady. When I explained everything, the missed Mother's Day, the money requests, the unexplained withdrawal, she didn't interrupt. She just nodded. You're not wrong to feel uneasy, she said when I finished, and you're not obligated to explain your boundaries to anyone. We reviewed my accounts, the authorization Daniel still had, the will I'd written years ago when things felt different. Elaine asked me a question that sat heavy in the room. If nothing changed, would this still reflect what you want? The answer came faster than I expected. No. We updated everything. Access removed, accounts secured, my will rewritten carefully, thoughtfully, not out of punishment, but intention. I made provisions for my grandchildren, set aside education funds, but the house, my savings, they were no longer assumed. When I left her office, the air felt lighter, like I'd finally stood up straight after hunching for too long. I didn't tell Daniel or Melissa right away. Instead, I waited. It didn't take long. 3 weeks later, my phone rang again. Daniel. Same tone as before, careful, rehearsed. Daniel, he said, we really need that help we talked about. Things are getting tight. I closed my eyes, took a breath. I can't do that. Silence. What do you mean? He asked. I mean, I said calmly, I'm not giving you money. His voice changed then. Mom, you have it. That doesn't mean it's available, I replied. He tried again, guilt, pressure, the kids, the car, Melissa's voice in the background, sharper this time. I listened without interrupting. Then I said something I'd been practicing in my head for weeks. I love you, I said, but I won't be treated like a bank or an afterthought. The call ended cold. The fallout came quickly. Melissa stopped pretending altogether. Her messages were clipped, passive-aggressive. She posted photos online about toxic parents and setting boundaries, as if she hadn't been quietly crossing mine for years. Daniel pulled away. Fewer calls, shorter texts. When I did see the kids, it felt supervised, like visits were being rationed. And yet, beneath the hurt, something else was growing. Strength. I had chosen myself, not instead of them, but with myself included. The real shock, though, wasn't what I did. It was what happened when the truth finally surfaced, publicly. Because secrets like theirs don't stay buried forever. And when they came asking again, this time in front of others, I didn't flinch. I spoke. And everything changed. The confrontation didn't happen the way I imagined it would. There was no shouting, no dramatic entrance, no slammed doors. It happened over coffee and paper plates at my niece's graduation party. I almost didn't go. By then, things with Daniel and Melissa had grown tense in that quiet, polite way that hurts more than open anger. But my sister insisted, and part of me didn't want to shrink my world any further just to avoid discomfort. So I went. The backyard was full of familiar faces, family, old neighbors, people who'd known Daniel since he was a boy. Someone had set up a long table with trays of sandwiches and bowls of fruit salad. Kids ran through the grass, laughing, their shoes flashing in the sun. Daniel and Melissa arrived late. I saw them before they saw me. Melissa's posture was stiff, her smile practiced. Daniel looked tired, the way he had for months now. They greeted everyone loudly, like they needed to be seen. When Daniel finally spotted me, he hesitated. Then he walked over, Melissa right behind him. "Mom," he said, leaning in for a quick hug. It felt careful, measured. Melissa nodded. "Ruth." I nodded. We stood there awkwardly for a moment, the hum of conversation filling the space between us. Then Melissa cleared her throat. "So," she said, loud enough for the nearby relatives to hear, "have you given any more thought to helping us out?" My heart skipped, not because I was afraid, but because I realized this was intentional. Daniel's eyes widened. She said, "What? It's family. We shouldn't have secrets." A few heads turned. My sister looked over, sensing the shift in the air. I took a sip of my coffee. It tasted bitter. I set the cup down slowly. "I have thought about it," I said evenly. Melissa crossed her arms. And my answer is still no." The murmurs started immediately, quiet, curious. Daniel swallowed hard. "Daniel, can we not do this here?" he said under his breath. "You chose here," I replied softly, meeting Melissa's gaze. She scoffed. "I just don't understand how you can sit on all that money while your own family struggles." That word, sit, did something to me. I didn't sit on it. I worked for it. I planned. I sacrificed. Someone nearby went still. I could feel the attention now. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "And while we're being open," I continued, "I should also say this. Money taken from my account without my knowledge isn't help, it's theft." Daniel froze. Melissa's face drained of color. "What are you talking about?" I turned to my son. "You know exactly what I'm talking about." The silence was thick. Even the kids seemed to quiet down. Daniel's shoulders slumped. He looked older in that moment, smaller. "I was going to tell you. We were desperate." My sister stepped closer. "Tell her what?" "That $2,000 you took 3 weeks ago," I said, still calm, "was not a gift, and it was the last straw." Melissa shook her head. "That's not fair. He had access." "Access isn't permission," I replied. People were openly watching now. Some looked shocked, others looked sadly unsurprised. "I didn't embarrass you," I said to Daniel, my voice low but steady. "You embarrassed yourself when you chose secrecy over honesty." Melissa opened her mouth, then closed it. For once, she had nothing to say. I picked up my purse. I came here to celebrate a graduation, not to negotiate my worth. I turned and walked away, my legs steady, my heart pounding but strong. That night, my phone exploded. Texts from relatives, calls from Daniel, messages from Melissa, angry, defensive, desperate. I didn't respond to any of them, not right away. The next morning, Daniel showed up at my door alone. He looked like he hadn't slept. His hair was uncombed, his eyes red. "I messed up," he said quietly. I let him in. We sat at the kitchen table again, that same table where so much had already been said and left unsaid. "She pushed," he admitted, "about the house, about the money. I should have stopped it." "Yes," I said, You should have. He nodded, tears finally spilling over. I didn't realize how far it had gone until yesterday. I passed him a tissue. I believe you. He looked up, surprised. You do? I believe you're tired and torn and that you made bad choices trying to keep the peace with your wife. He bowed his head. I'm sorry I skipped Mother's Day. That hurt landed differently, sharper. I'm not angry about the day. I'm angry about what it represented. He nodded again. I know. We talked for hours about boundaries, about trust, about how love doesn't mean access to everything you own. When he left, nothing was magically fixed. Melissa didn't apologize. Things weren't suddenly warm again. But something had shifted. The truth was out. And for the first time in a long while, I wasn't carrying it alone. I stood at the window after he drove away, watching the light change in the yard. The house felt like mine again. Not because I'd won, but because I'd finally stood in it, fully, honestly, without shrinking. The days after that conversation felt strange, quiet, but not hollow. I expected to feel shaken, maybe even regretful. Instead, there was a calm that settled into my bones, the kind that comes when you finally stop arguing with your own instincts. I went about my routine slowly, morning tea by the window, a short walk around the block, watering the plants on the porch. The world hadn't changed, but I had. Daniel didn't call for a few days. When he did, his voice sounded different, less guarded, more like the boy I used to know. I talked to Melissa, he said carefully. I didn't respond right away. I'd learned the power of silence. She's upset, he continued. She feels like you made her look bad. I let out a small breath. She didn't need my help with that. He gave a tired chuckle. I know. He told me they were arguing about money, about expectations, about what family actually meant. He admitted something then that sat heavy between us. She thought the house was settled, that eventually it would just pass to us. And what did you think? I asked. There was a pause. I never really thought about it, he said. I guess I let her think it. That answer hurt, but it was honest, and honesty, even when it stings, has a way of clearing the air. Over the next few weeks, the tension became visible to everyone. Family gatherings were quieter. Melissa kept her distance. When she did speak to me, it was polite but stiff, like we were strangers sharing a bus ride. Then came the real consequence. Daniel called me one evening, his voice tight. We're separating, at least for now. I closed my eyes, not from shock, but from sadness. I'm sorry, I said. So am I, he replied, but I can't keep living like everything's a transaction. He moved into a small apartment closer to work. The kids stayed primarily with Melissa, but he brought them by when he could. When Lily hugged me again after weeks apart, she clung a little tighter than before. I missed you, Grandma, she whispered. I missed you too, I said, pressing my cheek to her hair. Melissa never apologized, not directly, but she stopped asking, stopped hinting, stopped assuming. That, in its own way, was accountability. As for me, I took that time to rebuild, not just financially, but emotionally. I joined a book club at the library, started taking better care of myself. I even repainted the guest room, a soft green that made the light feel kinder. I updated my will again, just to be sure, not out of fear, but intention. Months later, Mother's Day came around again. This time, I didn't set the table for anyone but myself. I bought fresh flowers, made a small breakfast, sat on the porch with my coffee and watched the neighborhood wake up. Around noon, my phone buzzed. It was Daniel. Happy Mother's Day, he said. His voice was gentle, present. Thank you, I replied. I know I don't say this enough, but you taught me something important last year. What's that? I asked. Love isn't measured by what you give up. It's measured by what you protect. I smiled, tears welling. I'm glad you see that now. We talked for a while about the kids, about work, about life. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. That evening, I opened the picture frame I'd bought the year before and placed the photo inside, not because I needed the past back, but because I'd made peace with it. Skipping Mother's Day had been painful, but asking for money afterward had revealed something deeper. And the shock of their lives wasn't the refusal, it was realizing I finally knew my worth and wouldn't trade it for approval. The days after that conversation felt strange, quiet, but not hollow. I expected to feel shaken, maybe even regretful. Instead, there was a calm that settled into my bones, the kind that comes when you finally stop arguing with your own instincts. I went about my routine slowly, morning tea by the window, a short walk around the block, watering the plants on the porch. The world hadn't changed, but I had. Daniel didn't call for a few days. When he did, his voice sounded different, less guarded, more like the boy I used to know. I talked to Melissa, he said carefully. I didn't respond right away. I'd learned the power of silence. She's upset, he continued. She feels like you made her look bad. I let out a small breath. She didn't need my help with that. He gave a tired chuckle. I know. He told me they were arguing about money, about expectations, about what family actually meant. He admitted something then that sat heavy between us. She thought the house was settled, that eventually it would just pass to us. And what did you think? I asked. There was a pause. I never really thought about it, he said. I guess I let her think it. That answer hurt, but it was honest, and honesty, even when it stings, has a way of clearing the air. Over the next few weeks, the tension became visible to everyone. Family gatherings were quieter. Melissa kept her distance. When she did speak to me, it was polite but stiff, like we were strangers sharing a bus ride. Then came the real consequence. Daniel called me one evening, his voice tight. We're separating, at least for now. I closed my eyes, not from shock, but from sadness. I'm sorry, I said. So am I, he replied. But I can't keep living like everything's a transaction. He moved into a small apartment closer to work. The kids stayed primarily with Melissa, but he brought them by when he could. When Lily hugged me again after weeks apart, she clung a little tighter than before. I missed you, Grandma, she whispered. I missed you too, I said, pressing my cheek to her hair. Melissa never apologized, not directly, but she stopped asking, stopped hinting, stopped assuming. That, in its own way, was accountability. As for me, I took that time to rebuild, not just financially, but emotionally. I joined a book club at the library, started taking better care of myself. I even repainted the guest room, a soft green that made the light feel kinder. I updated my will again just to be sure, not out of fear, but intention. Months later, Mother's Day came around again. This time, I didn't set the table for anyone but myself. I bought fresh flowers, made a small breakfast, sat on the porch with my coffee, and watched the neighborhood wake up. Around noon, my phone buzzed. It was Daniel. Happy Mother's Day, he said. His voice was gentle, present. Thank you, I replied. I know I don't say this enough, but you taught me something important last year. What's that? I asked. That love isn't measured by what you give up. It's measured by what you protect. I smiled, tears welling. I'm glad you see that now. We talked for a while about the kids, about work, about life. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. That evening, I opened the picture frame I'd bought the year before and placed the photo inside, not because I needed the past back, but because I'd made peace with it. Skipping Mother's Day had been painful, but asking for money afterward revealed something deeper. And the shock of their lives wasn't the refusal, it was realizing I finally knew my worth and wouldn't trade it for approval. The story didn't end quietly, even though I wished it would. When families fracture, the sound carries farther than you expect. It seeps into phone calls that start with, "I don't mean to get involved, but..." It shows up in sideways looks at church, in pauses that linger a little too long when your name comes up. I didn't spread my side of the story. I didn't need to. The truth has a way of surfacing on its own when enough people have seen the edges of it. It started with my sister. She called one afternoon, her voice low and careful. "I ran into Melissa's cousin at the store." I sighed softly. "And?" "She told me Melissa's been saying you cut them off to punish her." I laughed once, short, humorless. "Punish her for what?" "For setting boundaries," my sister said. Then she paused. "That's not how it looked to anyone else." Word had already begun to spread, but not the version Melissa hoped for. People remembered things, comments she'd made about my house, the way she'd talked about money like it was a scorecard, how quickly she'd pushed Daniel to ask for help, then resented me for saying no. It didn't take much for people to connect the dots. The real turning point came at church. I debated going back. Part of me didn't want to face the whispers, the pity, the curiosity, but another part of me refused to be pushed out of a place that had grounded me for years. So I went. I sat in my usual pew, hands folded in my lap, listening to the organ hum through the sanctuary. The sermon was about stewardship, about caring for what you've been given, not just materially, but emotionally. I almost smiled at the timing. After the service, people stopped to talk. Some hugged me, some asked gentle questions. I answered honestly, but briefly. I wasn't there to justify myself. Then Melissa arrived. She hadn't been coming regularly since the separation, but that Sunday she walked in with her head high, Daniel nowhere in sight. I could feel the shift in the room before she even spoke. She approached me near the coffee table, her smile tight. "Ruth?" "Melissa," I said calmly. A few women lingered nearby, pretending to fuss with napkins. "I just want you to know that I never meant for things to get so dramatic." I met her eyes. "Neither did I." She swallowed. "Families should support each other." "They should," I agreed, "and that includes respecting boundaries." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable, for me at least. One of the women beside us cleared her throat. "Well, I think it's brave when a mother knows when to say no." Melissa's face flushed. I didn't say another word. I didn't have to. After that, the invitation slowed, for her, not for me. People still asked how Daniel was doing, how the kids were. No one asked Melissa about money anymore. No one joked about my house being the inheritance. The unspoken rules had changed. A few weeks later, Daniel told me something that confirmed what I'd already sensed. "She's been having a hard time," he said quietly. "People don't see her the same way." I didn't feel triumph at that, just a sad kind of inevitability. She chose her approach. The rest followed. The public consequence wasn't humiliation. It wasn't revenge. It was exposure. And exposure has a way of stripping away entitlement. Melissa eventually apologized to Daniel, not to me. But she stopped pressing, stopped hinting, stopped acting like my life was a waiting room for hers. That was enough. As the months passed, something else happened too. Daniel began to change. He started budgeting carefully, took on extra work, learned slowly what it meant to stand on his own without reaching for what wasn't his. Our conversations grew easier, less strained. One evening, while the kids were playing in the yard, he turned to me and said, "I didn't realize how much I leaned on you without really seeing you." I watched Lily chase bubbles across the grass. "A lot of mothers disappear that way, quietly." He replied, "I don't want that." "Then don't let it happen," I said simply. The house felt different now, not lonelier, just clearer. I wasn't waiting for calls that might not come. There's a moment after everything settles when you finally hear your own thoughts again. For me, it came one quiet evening as I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the sky soften from blue to gray. The neighborhood was calm. A dog barked somewhere down the street. A porch light flicked on across the road. Ordinary sounds, ordinary life. And yet, I felt changed in a way that was anything but ordinary. For years, I thought being a good mother meant always being available, always forgiving, always stepping in when my child stumbled, even if it meant I was the one losing my balance. I told myself that was love. I wore it like a badge of honor. But love, I've learned, can turn quiet and dangerous when it's built on fear of being left behind. Skipping Mother's Day hurt more than I admitted at the time, not because of the card or the flowers, but because it confirmed a truth I'd been trying not to see. I had slowly been reduced to a role, a safety net, a solution. And when the requests for money followed the silence, something in me finally woke up. It wasn't anger, it wasn't bitterness, it was clarity. I think many women my age know that moment, the one where you realize you spent decades accommodating, adjusting, smoothing things over. You convince yourself it's easier that way, kinder. But what it really does is teach people how much of you they're allowed to take. When I said no, I didn't do it to punish anyone. I did it to save myself. The shock they felt wasn't about the money. It was about the shift, about realizing I wasn't going to quietly play the part they'd already written for me. And while that realization fractured things at first, it also made room for honesty, real honesty, for the first time in years. I still love my son. That never changed. Love doesn't disappear just because boundaries show up. If anything, it becomes clearer, healthier, more honest. I still adore my grandchildren. I show up for them in ways that don't require me to disappear in the process. And as for Melissa, I don't carry resentment anymore. I understand her better now. Fear does strange things to people. So does entitlement. I don't excuse it, but I no longer let it live rent-free in my heart. There's a quiet dignity that comes from choosing yourself after a lifetime of choosing everyone else. It doesn't come with applause. It doesn't feel dramatic. It feels steady, grounded, like standing on solid ground after years of walking on shifting sand. I used to think peace came from keeping everyone happy. Now I know it comes from being honest with others and with yourself. If you're listening to this and feeling that familiar tightness in your chest, if you've been overlooked, taken for granted, or only remembered when someone needs something, please hear me when I say this. You are not selfish for wanting respect. You are not cruel for setting boundaries, and you are not obligated to shrink just to stay included. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do, for everyone involved, is to stop giving in silence and start standing in truth. Mother's Day comes and goes every year. Cards fade, flowers wilt, but self-worth, that's something you carry with you. So I'll leave you with this. If the people you love skipped celebrating you but remembered you when they needed something, what would you have done in my place? Would you have said yes again, or would you have finally chosen yourself? If this story touched you or felt familiar in any way, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you've lived through something similar, know that you're not alone. Thank you for listening. And if you want to hear more real stories like this one, don't forget to subscribe and support the channel. Sometimes sharing the truth is how healing begins. The months that followed felt almost ordinary, but ordinary in a way that was extraordinary for me. I woke up each morning without that tight, anxious knot in my chest that had been there for weeks, months even, after Mother's Day. I could breathe, truly breathe, and with that clarity came something I hadn't realized I'd lost along the way: joy. Quiet, patient joy that didn't come from anyone else's validation. I spent more time with the grandkids, yes, but differently. Not as a substitute parent, not as a wallet or a safety net, but as a grandmother, as someone they could trust without the weight of adult mistakes pressing down. Lily would run up to hug me after school, chattering about everything and nothing. Noah would sneak into the kitchen and ask for a cookie, grinning as if daring me to say no. And I didn't mind. I didn't flinch. I gave them love freely, and freely I could walk away from the guilt that used to trail me like a shadow. Daniel called me one evening after work, the sun setting orange over the backyard. "Dad," he said softly, "I just wanted to thank you for holding your ground." I smiled, stirring my tea. "It wasn't for me, Daniel. It was for all of us. For you, for the kids, and for me." "I know," he said, "and I get it now. I really do." It wasn't a dramatic reconciliation. There was no hugging and crying for hours. It was simple, quiet, honest. And I realized that sometimes honesty, not grand gestures, is the most powerful form of love. Melissa never apologized directly to me, but she stopped testing boundaries. The subtle digs, the hints, the passive-aggressive comments, they ceased. She interacted civilly, like adults who had learned the hard way that respect is earned, not assumed. The real consequence for her wasn't embarrassment, it was reality. People could see who had been fair and who had overstepped. And in the quiet, without fanfare, justice was served. I started to notice other things too, little victories that didn't feel like victories at all until I paused to acknowledge them. The way neighbors now asked me for advice instead of passing judgment. The way my friends began to see me differently, not just as the sweet, accommodating mother, but as a woman who knew her worth and stood by it. The way Daniel and I could sit on the porch together, sipping coffee and chatting about everything and nothing, without tension, without fear. I began to reclaim pieces of myself I'd forgotten existed. I joined a painting class at the community center. I traveled to a small coastal town I dreamed about for decades, waking before dawn to watch the tide roll in, feeling the wind pull the salt from the ocean and carry it through my hair. I walked along the shore, bare feet in the wet sand, and realized that freedom sometimes comes in the form of simple, ordinary choices. The choice to breathe, to step into sunlight, to take up space without apology. One evening, I looked through the old photo albums tucked in the living room, pictures of Daniel as even now, months later, I think about that day, Mother's Day, the one that started it all. At the time, I felt invisible, forgotten, hurt. I kept asking myself, did they even care? Was I just a convenience they could ignore until they needed something? I replayed it in my head countless times. The empty phone, the unopened card, the quiet absence that screamed louder than words ever could. And then, just days later, the request for money, the polite yet expectant tone, the way they leaned on me without hesitation, as though my love and care entitled them to more than respect. It hit me that love alone wasn't enough.
No matter how much you give, some people won't see you unless you show them clearly where your boundaries lie. Some people won't understand until they face the reality of a line they can't cross. And sometimes the people we care about most need the lesson the hardest. I remember sitting on my porch that evening after everything had come to light. The confrontation at the graduation party, the fallout with Melissa, the quiet acknowledgement from Daniel. I held a cup of tea in my hands, still warm from the kettle, and I looked at the horizon where the sun was slipping into the clouds. The air smelled faintly of autumn leaves and wet grass. I thought about how fragile relationships can be and how resilient people can become when they honor themselves. I thought about my son, about the boy he used to be, the man he is now. He had always loved his family, of course, but his understanding of love had been incomplete. He had equated love with ease, comfort, and access without realizing that love is also about respect. Watching him grapple with that, seeing him struggle, falter, and finally step into accountability, it was painful, yes, but it was also a kind of beauty I hadn't expected to witness. And Melissa, I stopped trying to figure her out, stopped needing her validation. I let her have her anger, her pride, her misjudgments. I realized that sometimes people can only see so far before their own ego blinds them, and I could not be responsible for that, not anymore. My responsibility was to myself, to my own sense of worth, and to my grandchildren. I thought about all the women I've known who silently bear the weight of others' expectations: mothers, daughters, wives, grandmothers, women who bend and stretch to accommodate everyone, only to find that when the time comes, no one is holding the door open for them. I think about how often I let that happen to myself, how long I carried a quiet resentment because I didn't dare set limits, how many small indignities I swallowed in the name of keeping the peace. I learned something profound through this experience. Boundaries are not a lack of love, they are an act of courage. They are the bridge between respect and relationship. Without boundaries, love can become a silent demand, an unspoken ledger where every kindness is assumed to have a cost-free return. With boundaries, love becomes clear, intentional, and mutual. I also learned that consequences are not always dramatic. Melissa didn't face public shame. Daniel didn't storm out of my house or scream. The consequences were subtle, quiet, but real. Awareness, reflection, change. Sometimes the most profound consequences are the ones that force a person to look in the mirror, to confront their own assumptions, and to acknowledge